As tensions continued to mount between the United States and China, not only was the US working on more microbial solutions to the threat, which became known as the New Plague, but they were also genetically experimenting with animals in an attempt to make them stronger and more ferocious. Through the process, they ended up with a creature known as the Deathclaw. This reptilian beast was 3 times the size of an average man, but also would be mentally altered to become more intelligent than its original form. What sort of changes genetically did this creature have to undergo to reach this status? Let's discuss in today's episode covering the lore and morphology of the Deathclaw from Fallout, with a more specific morphological focus on the Fallout 4, as this is the clearest of the features that we can see. So at the beginning, there were chameleons, and life was good. Specifically, a chameleon that possesses its own horns and can change its skin color to adapt to the surrounding areas. This chameleon is carnivorous and will hunt down small bugs, such as centipedes and spiders. These chameleons are known as Triceros jacksoni, and they will hunt the forest, but interestingly, unlike many of the other lizards, they're not really that territorial. Granted, they will put on a color to display to kind of run off other males during mating season. The intention though is not to fight, but really to intimidate. This is a little bizarre, as someone looked at this creature and said, you know, I bet I could turn that into a towering behemoth that could be a man-eater in battle, because that's quite literally what happened. When taken to the experimental labs, these chameleons would have had their genetics severely altered, some more than others too. The creation of the Deathclaw from the Triceros jacksoni is no small feat, and would also require the addition of many other genomes to ultimately produce the monster that stalks the wasteland. When the nuclear bombs fell from the sky, most unaltered humans would fall to the heat, pressure wave, or subsequent radiation. Some 200 years later, the land is still scarred and irradiated. To humans, it's an extremely hostile environment capable of game-ending them fairly easily should they not watch where they step. To a Deathclaw, this is simply a buffet. When Deathclaws came out, it's pretty clear to scientists and researchers that they needed an animal capable of not only surviving in combat out on the field, but also surviving any of the radiation they came across. Again, these creatures were designed to be fighting alongside troops, and as such, should someone drop like a fat man on the soldiers, the Deathclaws would counterattack the Chinese troops despite the human soldiers being annihilated. They would also be utilized in search and destroy missions so that they could easily be dropped on enemy strongholds for close combat action, quickly running through any defenders that stand in their way. Deathclaws are physically imposing creatures standing roughly 9 to 10 feet tall, or about roughly 2.7 to 3 meters tall. They would tower over your common soldier even in power armor. From snout to tail, they also measure about 20 feet long, which comes out to 6.1 meters. This size also has another consequence. With large, powerful arms and its muscular body, this creature would roughly weigh about 2,200 pounds or about 1,000 kilograms, and that is extrapolated from the size of bears, so nobody can go down in the comments and tell me I suck at actually sizing animals up, because I might. It can throw around this weight and completely decimate any of those that stand against it. These terrifying proportions in the beginning seem to be something of a mythos to Wastelanders. Stories about dangerous animals were known, but the Deathclaw was heralded as just a tale meant to scare children. However, this was anything but a made-up story that should be taken lightly. Making their way from the areas that they were originally experimented on in the east and west where they were being held, no other naturally occurring creature could compare in sheer lethality. The Deathclaw would quickly climb up the food chain in the surrounding area and become the apex species. Humans still contend somewhat for the top of the food chain, but only because of our knowledge of tools and how to use these particular tools that I can't name here. Without these tools, the human would pretty much just take a back seat to the raw power the Deathclaw possesses, because spears are not going to do anything. Able to bisect an unarmored human with just a few swipes, our frail meat suits cannot compare. As the Deathclaws began spreading their influence further across the continental United States, they would leave the realm of myth and enter reality. Humans began to come more and more into contact with these beasts. While Deathclaws do not actively, or at least usually, seek out humans to hunt or consume, as humanity began getting back on its feet and pushing further out into the waste, interactions began to mount, and it became known that usually casualties on the human side would be very high. So powerful are the Deathclaws that the Brotherhood of Steel, even wearing full power armor, can lose the fight. Usually this happens when they wander into Deathclaw territory unaware that they actually have. In contrast to their chameleon base, they will fiercely defend their territory and are usually fairly successful at it. When the pack begins their attack, Deathclaws should not be regarded as just your typical mindless animal. The packs can be as large as 20 members with a pair of alphas at the top, a male and a female. They are fairly intelligent and use their brains to outwit their human competitors in some instances. As stated, Even those in power armor can be overwhelmed, so your typical Wastelander is easily brought down by the pack and consumed. Concerning sustaining these numbers though, they do have quite an interesting setup when it comes to reproduction, and genetically speaking, their cells are not like ours. Their typical behavior of a Deathclaw is much more like a wolf pack, actually concerning bearing young. The alphas will mate and have young, but other more submissive Deathclaws will not mate, just like other more submissive pack members in a wolf pack will not mate. This would help keep the pack strong and keep their traits of the strongest going for a long time. The Deathclaws will lay eggs, making them oviparous, as opposed to their ancestors who were actually ovoviparous, which means that the mother had eggs but gives birth to live young. These nests are fiercely guarded and the eggs are considered to be extremely hardy. Not surprising given the environment. Reproductively, their cells are very much so unlike our own. We know from the super mutant episode I did covering the FEV interaction with the human genome that sperm and eggs could not be replicated by the FEV, as the haploid cells were considered damaged by the virus standards. It would only alter the diploid cells of our body, turning the double helical structure into a quadrihelical structure concerning the DNA, which is essentially just your own regular cells. However, with the Deathclaws, it has been shown that their sex cells are actually diploid as well. Due to this, the virus will replicate these as well, meaning that they are not sterile like their super mutant competitors. And speaking of hardy, we need to talk about that before we actually get into their morphology. The exterior of a Deathclaw is something that is designed to withstand direct hits from powerful tools, blunt objects, and hits from power armor, or really anything anyone can throw at it. The hide of a Deathclaw is extremely thick and durable, not easily pierced by pointed objects. Anything short of your most powerful arsenal won't do much against it. On top of that, the body spikes exist on the back as well. These bony protrusions protect the back, making it tough for you to engage in hand-to-hand combat without injuring yourself. So this also makes them virtually impossible to jump on the creature's back and try to go for some more vulnerable positions like the neck. The Deathclaw is a creature rooted in necessity of its physical biology. This creature has been genetically altered to become bipedal rather than quadrupedal like its ancestor. This has had the effect of making it slower, but considering its overall size, this has allowed it to stand up and observe the environment from a better vantage point of over 9 feet tall. This bipedalism also serves another purpose. It freed up the arms to be used more as an offensive manner rather than be bogged down by being a movement limb. This has increased its overall lethality to a massive degree. But let's go ahead and start where we know this needs to be start. I know we're already like pretty far in the video. Starting with the feet, we see that this creature has tough scaly skin and a digitigrade structuring of the bones. The Deathclaw will walk on the balls of its feet, which makes it more stealthy than you might imagine. This also allows the transfer of compressional force more effectively into its tendons and ligaments, allowing it to run longer and tire out less quickly than a plantigrade creature. There are 3 toes on total per foot, and each is tipped with a sharp claw. Claw can almost be likened to that of a velociraptor. These claws will be used for eviscerating any large prey should they be applied to the abdomen. Although a human would not have to worry about this, as you wouldn't last anywhere near long enough fighting this thing for it to grapple with you to use these claws. Moving up the legs, we see that the feet jut out backwards and up. The ankle exists several feet off the ground and bends at a 90-degree angle and into the knee. The knee sits directly over the foot and can absorb forces more easily as less is transferred to it. This would possibly solve a lot of issues in aging Deathclaws, like something, say, arthritis. Moving up to the quadriceps, we can now get a feel for how thick of a hide that the Deathclaw possesses. Not just the muscle being overhauled to support the weight, but a line of hide that runs into the front of the leg. This line would indicate that the skin of this reptile is thick with probably like 7 Cs. On the interior of the leg, some muscle can be seen, as this would be less protected, seeing as though it's on the inside of the body and damage was less likely to occur than say on the outside of the body. The pelvic region is interesting because as you continue, you see a long jutting abdominal arch. Just like with the legs, this implies that the skin here has been strengthened, and obviously this would have been important because in combat scenarios, the internal organs are right behind it, so stopping projectiles would have been needed. The pelvic arch will run to the back of the tail, and the tail of this creature provides a nice counterbalance to its forward-leaning posture. On top of this, when a Deathclaw runs at its top speed, it can turn more quickly even with all the momentum it has. The tail is swung around in a counter, and this momentum gives it a high degree of agility. The tail is covered in thick scaly skin as well, keeping it protected. The Deathclaw torso has a fairly massive ribcage to house the lungs and heart it needs to pump blood to all the muscle to fuel it with oxygen. On the sides of the ribcage, there can be seen right around where the false ribs would sit, large padded skin, which will protect the outsides of this beast. On the shoulders, they are also covered with a thick armor, as well as a few bony bumps that could be used for blunt force trauma should it run at you full force. Then we get to actually like the real money maker on this creature, the arms. The arms were designed to be as powerful and devastating as possible. The original chameleon already had fairly long arms used for grasping branches, so it still has roughly the same shape that we see in the Deathclaw, but is scaled up to an extreme degree. The biceps and triceps are about the size of your entire thigh. Moving down to the forearms, this is roughly the size of your chest. So definitely swole goals. Surrounding the arm are unsurprisingly more armor plating. Around the elbow, a sharper bony protrusion can be seen, which might be able to give them more pointed trauma to an aggressor. The forearm is about 2/3 as long as a full-grown man's leg. But then we get to those hands. The hands of a Deathclaw are quite literally where it gets its name. It has 5 fingers in total, with a middle finger being much longer. Why is this? Well, it's based upon its original ancestor who had an opposable thumb and 3 large fingers. This would wrap around the branches and hold on. The Deathclaw with its altered genome grouped 2 extra fingers. Each one of these fingers is tipped with a menacing claw that is roughly the size of your forearm at its longest. These claws are sharp enough to pierce armor and, as mentioned previously, could bisect a human fairly easily with just a few swipes. The power in the arms utilizing these claws means any close combat encounter should be avoided at all costs, as a power suit will not even save you. Moving up to the head, we can still see some of the original chameleon features despite heavy alteration. The horns are still there, however, they are going to be much larger than that of their ancestors, obviously, and can be used as an offensive weapon, much like a battering ram. The face is more smashed in, but a large detraction from their chameleon lineage. The eyes are forward-facing and fixed like a predator, as opposed to the side eyes the chameleons have that can be moved in all directions. The ability to move them independently does not appear to be present in the Deathclaws, so this was something that was intentionally bred out. The mouth has largely been altered as well, with large teeth several inches in length. These pointed teeth carry on its carnivorous traits, but instead of bugs, it is now straight up eating meat. The nose of this creature is flat, but even still is said to have a keen sense of smell and hearing. The eyes, however, are not as good as they used to be and have suffered degradation through the process of genetic altering. Speaking of the head of this creature, we must talk about its intelligence. Deathclaws experimented on utilizing the FEV by the Enclave gained the ability to speak human languages. These particular Deathclaws, as a result, were not as aggressive. Most exhibited the intelligence of an 8-year-old and react as such to the presence of humans less aggressively. Some still were even smarter than this. They would possess the intelligence of your average adult and as such could interact with humans as we would with others. But those out in the wild do not share these traits. Most communicated in low grunts and growls, but some have exhibited the ability to talk like a parrot, mimicking the words that they have heard from humans. It's not clear if this is a hunting technique or something that they are just capable of, but this is no indication to say that this means they know what they are saying. Another thing to note about the Deathclaws is their ability of their skin to change colors. Most of the species at this point has lost this ability to do this, but some still exhibit the trait. Skin colors vary quite a bit depending on where you go and find a Deathclaw, and some have been known to glow green, although this could be attributed to the radioactive environment more than a conscious choice. So also, let's discuss their ability to resist radiation in their environment for a moment. They were genetically altered experiments pre-war, however, due to tampering by the master utilizing FEV, they more than likely became resistant to radiation via FEV code corrections. However, some sources say that the FEV was used from the beginning, giving them the already native ability to not be taken out by high levels found on the surface. But then again, there's so much of the lore that crisscrosses, there is really no telling exactly if FEV was used from the beginning or if it was used later. And last but not least, how does this creature game in those that it does come across? Due to its muscular nature, it can actually just straight up lift a full-grown man with a single arm. It will raise them high into the air, and you are not actually going to be able to escape. It will unsheath more of its claws as it spreads its hands and jam those claws into your abdomen. Due to the size of these claws, they would curl up underneath your ribcage, ripping through the diaphragm of a person and turning your lungs, heart, as well as vena cava and aorta into mincemeat. You would almost immediately go into shock, and that would be the end of your wasteland travels. Anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope everyone enjoyed. Thinking about trying to cover how Ellie was immune to the cordyceps for the next episode. Not really sure how I'll do it, but maybe expect that out soon. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, merch, and Patreon links in the description if anybody's interested in that. And I'd like to thank a few of my patrons. Huge shout out to It's Not a Spoon and Laffy No Skill. Thank you guys, and I also want to thank Freedom Units 44, The Lone Titan, and Skilt, as well as the rest of my patrons as well. You guys are total ballers. Alright, so that does it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.